Hello everybody, my name's James, and for the benefit of those listening to the audio, you're listening to Ask James, my regular YouTube live stream where I welcome questions from the YouTube community on anything football related. To timestamp this, it's just gone 12 PM UK time on Friday, June the 7th. We are circa just a little over a week away from the beginning of Euro 2024, and I suspect there might be a number of England questions in the chat. Let's get into them. JP says, hi James, what are your thoughts on Gareth's squad and why he didn't decide after one more game so you could see players like Branthwaite, etc. Grealish looked good and offers something different. Yeah, I think for me, leaving Jack Grealish out, for those who'd listened to the podcast we did on Tuesday, is the one that's come as a real surprise to me. I'd said on that podcast that I didn't think that Branthwaite would make it in. That said, obviously at the time I was working on the assumption that Harry Maguire would go in. I probably would have taken both. I spoke on that podcast on Tuesday at length about I thought Eze would miss out. I didn't want him to miss out, but it was just a case of too many cooks. So there was always going to be someone that was left out that was going to really disappoint and cause some frustration. Yes, I would have picked Branthwaite once Maguire was left out because I would have had the extra cover defensively. And I think the fact that he's left-footed would have helped and benefited. But the reality is he wouldn't have seen many minutes unless there was a crisis. In the case of Grealish, it's particularly surprising because we're probably going to have to start the tournament, I think, with a right-footed left-back. Well, it's not even a think, we know, basically. And Jack's ability to hold the touchline, I think, would have been very useful. I think I spoke on Tuesday's pod as well about Eze and thinking in the first half, what's the reason to not pick Eze over Grealish at this stage? And then seeing Grealish in the last half hour and getting a little reminder of what Jack is very capable of. There is an inexperience, I think, in some of the attacking positions for England. That said, with Jack, I mean, what's he, 10 starts this season? Few goals, few assists. Maybe in reflection, it shouldn't come as a huge surprise. Eze is in fantastic form. I think that's what the decision is. Me and Clates were pretty confident when we spoke on Tuesday that Anthony Gordon was certainly going to go in. And we were both in agreement that Anthony Gordon will see substantial minutes for England in this tournament. I mean, it might surprise. I wouldn't be hugely shocked if he started against Serbia. I said that on Tuesday. I don't think he will, but I wouldn't be hugely shocked. So, yeah, I mean, generally quite happy with the squad. The Grealish one is the one that's come as a real surprise. In terms of Branthwaite and why he didn't wait until after the game this evening, the deadline for submission of the 26 players is 11 o'clock tonight. That's the final deadline. So he obviously didn't want to notify players immediately after the game tonight and submit the squad at the same time. Probably in hindsight, it would have been better if England had arranged to play the game last night rather than tonight. Probably would have been more beneficial because that would have allowed, I think, the extra game. You can still make changes, I believe. So if that squad was to be submitted and obviously there's an injury tonight, then obviously Jarell Quansah's going to join the squad. If there was 2 injuries, I believe that someone else could be called up under that circumstance, as long as I think it's at least sort of 24 hours before England's first game. So it could be that someone like Branthwaite does still end up going if, I don't mean, what happens if John Stones gets injured tonight, for example. But that's why he's not waited. It's the final deadline. He's too close to the final whistle tonight, basically. He's probably regretful that England are playing tonight. Actually, probably should have arranged for the game to be last night. JP also says, Dunkey's worrying. Other than that, the squad picked itself. Yeah, I mean, you're going to get varying opinions. On Lewis Dunk, we shouldn't be surprised that he's gone in. I said on Tuesday that I thought he would go in. And I said then probably Dunk over Branthwaite again, under the expectation that Maguire would go in as well. I think with Maguire pulling out, he absolutely sealed that Lewis Dunk was going to go, in my opinion. Purely from an experience and a leadership perspective. As good as we could look at Branthwaite as a great player. But if Stones got injured and suddenly we're playing Gay and Branthwaite at the back, who's leading that? Let's remember that Gay plays with Joachim Andersen at Crystal Palace, who as far as I'm aware, would largely do a lot of that. And at Everton, Branthwaite's got James Tarkowski sitting next to him. So these things we don't necessarily think about when we're choosing players. Right, okay, so if these players play together, who's the leader of the back line? Well, there's a lot of inexperience there. And the one thing that Lewis Dunk certainly has is the leadership qualities. He's also very good on the ball, and England will see a lot of that, particularly in the first 3 games, and subject to if we go through who we might play afterwards, that may well continue as well. Distribution's good, control, change tempo, ability to play long distance passes as well is good. So I think he's gone in for those few reasons. Yes, there is concern if we play to France and Dunk got isolated against an Mbappe, yeah, we're in trouble. We know that. But then I said this on one of the pods earlier this week as well. We always fought that case with Harry Maguire, and it never proved to be too much of a problem for England. I think the incident that Dunk had with Lukaku back in the spring internationals caused concern. We don't want that sort of thing to happen. Hopefully there's some experience in terms of learning from that particular moment. So I'm not surprised that Dunk has gone in. I would imagine at this stage that Mark Gay will play alongside John Stones. Frankly, if John Stones was to get injured under that circumstance, because of what I just said, Dunk will play because of the leadership and the organisational qualities, and I think that's one of the main reasons he's been picked. Adam says, what 11 would you go for in the opener versus Serbia, James? What would I go for? I won't be far from Gareth's team. So Pickford, Walker, Stones. I don't think there's any point even arguing the toss of what I would necessarily do, because it will be Mark Gay, and I'm perfectly happy with that. I'd be really surprised at this stage if it's not. Trips is going to play left back. Rice, I would probably start the tournament with Gallagher rather than do that the other way around. So I think Rice, Gallagher, Bellingham, and then the front 3 basically. I think near enough picks itself. Certainly Saka, certainly Kane. And then we want Foden in. I know there's a lot of concern of getting Foden off the left flank, but I think he can drift from there, particularly when we've got Saka able to hold the touchline on the other side. You might get bias in England's play. So I don't have a problem with Foden starting off the left. Yes, we'd rather him in central areas, but that goes for a lot of our players, actually. So that's probably what I'd do. It's also what I think Gareth will do in terms of the opening game. Again, to repeat what I said Tuesday, don't stress if Foden doesn't start against Serbia. He'll get his way in there. And again, yeah, I wouldn't be hugely shocked if, say, Anthony Gordon did well tonight. If Anthony Gordon started against Serbia, I wouldn't be surprised. David Fawn says, what's your predicted starting 11 from Gareth? Well, I've just done that. And if we meet France in the semis final, what starting 11 would you go for if you were manager? Probably the same at the moment. There's certain aspects of the team you'd have to have, like Cole Walker would definitely play, for example. I guess by that point you would hope that Luke Shaw is obviously ready to come in at left back. That would certainly help that side and allow Foden to get off of the flank and into more central and dangerous areas. I don't think it would evolve too much, but I think it's easy to forget, sort of, particularly with the attacking players. We had players who hit a bit of form in the World Cup, and then it was suddenly like, oh wow, want them in the team. So obviously Rashford came in against Wales and did really well, and then there was a clamour. Then there was a real surprise perhaps that he didn't start against Senegal, and Foden and Saka did well, and again it was largely forgotten about. So it's nice that we have these options to change things. I've seen people say things like, well, Jarrod Bowen won't get any minutes. I think you'd be surprised, because I think of those attacking players, if you need someone to get you to goal, I think he's as likely as anybody. He's a little bit more in behind perhaps than Saka. That's not to say he's ever going to start over Saka, but there might be minutes later in the game where that changes. It's also possible from what we've seen the other night that Southgate really wants Palmer as a 10 rather than a right-sided player. That may also come down to, against certain opposition, a little bit of, I don't want to say trust, a little bit of experience concern with Palmer defensively. I know some Chelsea fans have highlighted that, but obviously his performances going forward have been so good. It's shielded that a little bit this year. So, yeah, I'm not surprised that Jarrod Bowen still made it in. I think the first 11 we're all going to be quite close, aren't we? I said on Tuesday there was 3 positions that were kind of really up for debate. Left back, which isn't really up for debate because we basically know at the moment that Trips is going to start. Rice's partner in central midfield, and then there's a little bit question mark about the left-sided forward. Otherwise, I think we know what this is going to be now. Chris Smith says, do you feel we still need 50 transfers in Sky Fantasy Football if the number of postponements reduces as expected this coming season? Any other changes you'd like to see in the format? Shame they aren't doing Euros. No, look, I love Sky Fantasy for what it is. I just think we adapt, so it becomes a new process this year with less postponements. It might mean there's more of a case for using more earlier in the season, but there'll still be places with gains. I'm pretty sure about that, and most of them will still land nearer the end of the season, I suspect. So it's fair to say maybe back to 40, maybe, but then just use the transfers and you can be a little bit more aggressive than perhaps we've been in the past with it. Yeah, very disappointed in not doing a Euro game, because I think we all really enjoyed playing the World Cup format of Sky. It was my favourite one from the 2022 tournament. So yeah, disappointed. James Brennan says, hi James, loan sell keep for United. Amad Diallo, Wan-Bissaka, Rashford and Lindelof. Thanks, mate. Diallo, I would think loan. Certainly within the Premier League now. Could he be a good pickup where he'd get a lot of minutes? I don't know, let's say like a Wolves, a Fulham or a Brentford, something like that, for example. Wan-Bissaka is subject to what you're getting, isn't it? I feel like Wan-Bissaka's decent cover. It's just not what you want it to be if everyone's available, right? Probably needs another fullback if he was to go, but I think if he was to get a decent offer, it's a sell. Rashford, look, Marcus Rashford's been very streaky. I think it's fair to say when we look at the last few years as a whole, and I think he's had injury problems across them as well. United could still change manager. It's looking less and less likely at the moment, but they could still change manager, and that might reinvigorate him. And if you get the player that was in that sort of period after the 2022 World Cup, you obviously don't want to get rid. But from a selling perspective, this might be a point where you go, okay, let's look at it, 100% profit on the books. What can you do to change that? And there'd still be plenty of interest from clubs around Europe to take a player of that quality and calibre. So it's maybe a sell, but it's got to be, within and above the value that United would want, for example. Victor Lindelof, I think, is perfectly reasonable as a backup centre-back who I think probably has been one of United's better performers under Erik ten Hag when actually he's played. He's dependable, and I think as cover at centre-back, that's reasonable. You'll find difficult to improve on that as centre-back cover. Joseph Robinson says, once Stones gets his random usual injury early on, I think England's defence is so weak and will get absolutely terrorised in the later stages. Your thoughts, James? Okay, John Stones at major tournaments for England. So, was he there in 2016? Can't recall because we've just largely wanted to forget that from our brains, haven't we? But under the three tournaments under Gareth Southgate, I don't think he's got injured in the tournament, other than he limped off very late against France in the quarter-final, which people I think had largely forgotten. And that would have been a big concern. But so he's largely got through it. And he's going to have to get through this, is the reality. England got to manage him. I've been saying it for a long time. He's England's most important player because I don't think you can replace that. Absolutely crucial because we're not strong enough in that department. I accept that. That said, we've gone into several tournaments under Gareth Southgate and had real concerns defensively. We had these exact same concerns going into the Euros. Oh, Tyrone Mings is starting against Croatia. What are we going to do? Because Harry Maguire wasn't ready. And Tyrone Mings performed well to the extent he was a little bit unfortunate to come back out the team after that. And it was fine. We conceded 2 goals in a tournament we got to the final of. One was from a set play and one was from a long distance free kick. Similarly, World Cup. If I said to you, what were the backup centre-backs for England at the World Cup? Now, some of you will know, but when I say to you Connor Cody and Eric Dyer, some of you will go, what? Really? Yes, really. So I think we've gone into these last few tournaments being really concerned defensively, and it's not been a major issue. What did we concede at the last World Cup? Goal to Iran, we won 6-1, irrelevant. And then the 2 goals to France, the 3 goals conceded in 5 and 2 of them to was the favourites in the tournament. So we've had these concerns before, and we've dealt with it fine. I think the structure of the team is safe. It's one of the big concerns, isn't it? Oh, if we had a manager who's more flexible tactically, we'd do this, and this. Yeah, sure. But in tournament, international football, it's only about results. And England defensively, actually, across Gareth Southgate's 3 tournaments, have been pretty good. And everyone would have to acknowledge that. And I think going into all of them, having real concerns about how we be defensively. So I'm calm about it. Actually, what we're taking this time as a collective is, despite the concerns, is probably stronger than it was for the last tournament. FPL Andy says, morning James, which clubs do you think are in real trouble over profit and sustainability, and which clubs do you think will get out of it? They'll probably all get out of it. We did a podcast 2 or so months ago, and we highlighted 7 teams that would be a real concern if they were in the division this year. Chelsea, Newcastle, Villa, Forest, Everton, Leicester and Leeds, if they'd have come up, would have been a concern as well. So Leeds, you've crossed off that. The other 6 have all been spoken about this week in terms of a suggestion that they would possibly have to sell before the June 30th deadline to meet PSR requirements. It's believed that Chelsea will pass now, as per, I think, a report from David Ornstein either late yesterday or early today from The Athletic, which suggests that this sale of the hotels is going to put Chelsea in the situation where they do not have to sell before June 30th, but also probably won't be able to buy perhaps until after that period either. You can still agree deals, you just don't register it till July the 1st. So Chelsea probably going to be all right. Forest, my understanding is they do need to sell, but it doesn't have to be like 60 million for Morgan Gibbs-White. That can be made up of like Orel Mangala, I think it's going to join Lyon, and perhaps one more will probably be okay. Leicester are probably looking at a deduction anyway from previous stuff. Newcastle we think are okay. Villa we think are probably okay. Or I missed anyone else that from the list. Everton probably have to do something, we think. I would suggest it's possibly going to be something like Amadou and Nana gets sold maybe. But I wouldn't be surprised if they'll pass it off and Leicester get a deduction for previous stuff. Leicester are highly likely to start this season with a points deduction. I think that's the meat of the question, I think. Yeah, I think so. James Brennan says, would you rather England win the Euros or Spurs win the Carabao Cup next season? Spurs win the Carabao Cup next season, mate. We've done this 100 times over and I really can't bother to do it again. It's not that I don't love England. It's not that I don't want England to do well. It's just how I feel. I can't help it. And there are plenty of people who feel the opposite, and it's absolutely fine. Vish says, who won the TV debate, Sunak or Starmer? Didn't watch it, mate. I'd rather watch fucking paint dry. Rob Warnock says, hello, mate. Any predictions for next season? Top 4, surprise package, etc. City and Arsenal will be the top 2. I'd be amazed if that's any different. Liverpool adaptation will be a challenge. They may well do very well under Arne's slot, and I think they probably will. I think it's a decent appointment. You might get setbacks next season, though. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a dip and they finish on a lower points total. I would find it very difficult to envisage them winning the league next year. That goes for the rest of the other 17s as well. 17 teams. I think for Villa to finish top 4 again will be tough. We can certainly expect improvements from Newcastle. Chelsea's difficult to gauge. I think my team, Tottenham, will improve. Manchester United surely would improve. Can't see anyone else out of the top 8, if you will, sustain any form of challenge. That, the idea that Palace are going to challenge for top 4. I'm sure Palace fans are pretty sick of looking at the news at the moment about, Eze and Elise, it's like every day. This morning, Eze, 60 million release clause, 8 million add-ons, 68 million. I'm just looking at Daniel Levy, just hit the trigger and pay it, mate, if that's true. Michael Elise we think's probably going to go. Mark Gay's going to start for England, as it looks like, so that's going to create interest, no doubt, as well. And it's already going to be interest in Adam Wharton as well. So I think Palace have appointed a super manager in Oliver Glasner. But it's going to be really subject to the play. If they kept the whole team together, I still wouldn't see them challenging for top 4, but they could certainly push for European players. Their problem with Eze and Elise anyway has been keeping them fit long enough. Greg Frost says, Adam Wharton is the closest regen of Carrick we've seen this generation. Question. Yeah, that's not a bad shout, actually. I adored Michael Carrick, was such an underrated footballer, and would have solved so many of England's problems to get the trio of Lampard, Gerrard and Scholes all in the same team. The problem is you'd probably had to lose David Beckham from that to do that as well. But yeah, he didn't play nearly enough for England. Michael Carrick, great player. Look, it's really new with Adam Wharton. I think we were all very, very impressed with him. The simplistic nature of his play, his awareness, the crispness in what he displays with his passing is really good. We haven't seen him play for a side that's expected to win nearly every game that they play, and what that looks like defensively when there's a challenge, and we have to remember that. But yeah, really like what I've seen of him. I don't mind the Michael Carrick comparison, but we should be careful. We're allowed to be excited about him, but we should also be careful. I think we're excited about him because it's that, because you're saying, oh right, what's the comparison to Adam Wharton? Okay, yeah, from an English perspective, I have to look at a player and go back 10 plus years. That's right. That's why a lot of us have got high hopes for him. James Wright says, what's top of your priority list for Spurs in the transfer window? There's a number of things. I think, if Tottenham could prize Rodri out of Manchester City, that would be amazing. It's obviously not possible. So I don't know where you begin to try and find a player like that, but that's the biggest priority for Tottenham. I think is that position will be a game changer for us. And that profile of player is really not easy to find and get right. But yeah, that would be the biggest priority for me. And then Eze, which I don't think will happen. Jack Brokenshire says, no, Branthwaite is a shocking decision, but Quantz on standby is a terrible decision. I'm gutted about Branthwaite. Look, we're not privy to what's happened. It might have been that he's been asked, do you want to be on standby, and might have said no. I'm not saying that's happened, but we don't know, right? Quantz, obviously, as someone who hasn't even played for the national team, is probably really content and happy to be in that position. We don't know. I certainly don't think that Jarell Quantz has been picked above Jared Branthwaite. It's what player is appropriate to be on standby. Who knows if the situation could potentially change. Like I said, if there was a couple of defensive injuries tonight, does he suddenly get the call back? And you might think, well, you didn't want me, but you take it, don't you? Jarell Quantz is a really good, talented player. The reality of this as well is this with the centre-backs, and I'm really unhappy about this, that. The chances are, whether it's Branthwaite, Quantz, they're probably not seeing the pitch. Probably doesn't matter either way. So I wouldn't get too hung up about it. Rob Warnock says, where TF is the like button? It's normally the thumbs up. Give it a smash, mate. Cheers, Rob. Owen Wilson says, I would be looking to start Gomez at left back for the game Shaw is out. Don't know why Southgate hasn't looked at that more. He's the natural backup left back for me. Trippier not the same player as left back. I tell you what I think that is. I think it's a little bit psychological, because you really like Kieran Trippier as a right back, probably, right? And you think about the delivery, the pushing up on the right hand side, all the things that Trips can be. That's made him an amazing fantasy asset and a very good player for Newcastle and for England. So when he plays on the left, you don't get the same. With Joe Gomez, you don't get the Trips output on the right, so you're not influenced so much mentally to think about what he is on the left, right? Is Joe Gomez better at left back than Kieran Trippier? Not for me, no. No, particularly not with the opponents that we've got early on as well. If, we're playing France and they've got someone like Dembele who can be a little bit erratic, perhaps pulls onto that side, would I be more comfortable maybe with Joe Gomez playing on Trips? Yeah, maybe there's a real debate to be had. But I think with what we've got to open the tournament, no, I would prefer Trips to play there, mate. FPL Glass says, afternoon, did you enjoy your week off? I did, thank you. Weather wasn't Well, I was going to say, weather wasn't what I hoped for. Weather was what I expect in this country. Largely, when we've gone away in the UK, we've been pretty lucky. We weren't so much on this occasion. The place we were staying in, the heating even came on last Thursday as well. But yeah, nice break. Enjoyed it. Kind of still feel like I'm on it, right? Because I'm not watching games and not preparing. You know, who should I buy this week and all that. It kind of still feels like holiday mode. So this is a nice relaxed period. I'm really looking forward to obviously the tournament starting next week. Rob Warnock says you have to close the chat in order to like the video. This is a major design error unless I'm missing something. I wouldn't know, Rob. I don't spend enough time watching other people's content, unfortunately, to know that. But okay, didn't know that. So if you want to hit the like button and can't, maybe you need to close the chat, says Rob. Greg Frost says, Luke Shaw, England's best centre-back along with Stones. Question, would love to squeeze in another attacker like Saka or Gordon at left-back. So, Gordon at left-back, no. I mentioned and I have done a few times. I mentioned it on Tuesday's podcast, and I mentioned it on the Patreon podcast the week before as well, or 2 weeks before, about floating the idea of if Luke Shaw didn't make it, using Bukayo Saka potentially at left back. And I don't think we should rule it out as a possibility. And I absolutely get that people are like, you can't move your best right winger, da-da-da-da-da. I understand, and I don't disagree with that sentiment at all. That's where you want Saka to play. But when you start thinking about combinations of things like, okay, Konsa at left back and Saka right wing, now they're the opposite ends of each other, or can I use Saka as a really offensive left back that then pushes Foden from left wing into the 10 position, and I can still play Cole Palmer on the right? Against certain opponents, it should be considered. Again, do I want Saka defending against someone like Dembele? No, probably not. Could England have gotten away with playing that way against an opponent such as Bosnia as they played the other night? Where, why not? Why not? I think it's a little closed-minded to assume that that's something that couldn't happen. Southgate has played Saka at wing back, not at left back. It wasn't particularly successful. I think that's important to stress. But I don't think it's something that should be completely overlooked as a possibility when we've got players like Palmer and Bowen who are very capable of playing on the right flank. Bowen's not as good as Saka. Yes, I hear you. I hear you. But if it also helps, if the whole thing helps get Foden into a central area and the opponent is weak and we don't have to be concerned about transition, why would we not consider that sort of thing? That's all. That's all. In terms of Luke Shaw at centre-back, I don't hate that. But he needs to play left-back. to reverse back on what I've said, if Luke Shaw is available, he plays left-back. End of story. We think what they want to do with him, we think, is get him... He won't be involved against Serbia, we don't think. If they can get him a few minutes against Denmark, and then I think the ideal scenario would be that if England have qualified, try and get him 45 to 60 minutes as a starter against Slovenia in the final group game. Something like that feels like the target for him at the moment. The Iceman's in. James Drury says, hi James, long time no speak, you liar. Says, does it hurt not to see any Spurs players in the England squad? No, not at all. Not at all, actually. I mean, we had the most players of anyone in Euro 2016, and we'd rather put that tournament in the bin, I think, James. So, no, not at all, not at all. Would I like players there? I mean, Harry still feels like one of ours anyway, really, right? So, no, don't have a problem with it. There's not someone I look at and think, oh, he should have been in the squad and he plays for my team. There isn't anyone, so I've got no complaints from that perspective either. Adam says, will you be having a flutter on any markets? Top goal scorer, player of the tournament. Give us your tips. I think the bookies largely have the betting right, bar England. England are a much shorter price than they should be, and that's because of weight of money and covering your losses, if you will. So I think really France are the favourites, even if the bookies might tell you on paper that it's England. And it's interesting. There's graphics going around in the top right hand corner of the 24 qualifiers and their performances this century in the tournament, and it feels a little surprising that France haven't won it since 2000 actually. I don't think they're quite as strong as they have been in the last couple of tournaments actually, but I still think they may very well be the strongest team. And I might have a little bit of France. Top goal scorers and things like that, I would maybe look at someone as an each way or something like that. I can't say I looked at top goal scorers. My instinct on top goal scorer, I'd like to look at Lukaku actually, just because of Belgium's group. I think there's a hole in there somewhere. Player of the tournament. I mean, if I think France will win it, then it's some frappe, isn't it? Wayne Jenkins says, "Hey James, did you see Kevin Kilban's comments about Saka?" I'm gonna have to say no. It says the way he's treated by fans and now the media is getting out of hand. He gets mocked like few others do. I can't comment on it because I don't know what was said, mate. Sorry. Wayne Jenkins says, second question for me. If you had to guess, what do you think will be the biggest transfer this summer? Doesn't feel like there will be a Rice Grealish type of signing price-wise. I tell you what I did mainly say on the clubs and PSR, those at potential risk. You might have seen talk about Villa and Gallagher this week and the idea of John Duran going the other way. That is what we refer to as the old the Barca Juventus networking to get around it, because you can put the profit for the sale on the books and you can amortise the purchase. So both clubs increase their books. So really terrible example here. No one's suggesting it would happen, but something like Newcastle signing Douglas Luiz and Aston Villa signing Bruno Guimaraes would probably sort out both clubs' PSRs. Of course, neither of those things are going to happen. But the clubs might want to, Leicester and Forest might want to look at doing some business together and doing swaps. I don't think this stuff doesn't get spoken about. If you see a transfer like that happening in the next couple of weeks, yeah, it's possibly part why. So Morgan Gibbs White's going to Leicester. That's really, really. Avadivi's going to Forest. It's really, really weird. In terms of big transfers this summer, I don't think City needs to do business. Arsenal are obviously being linked with Benjamin Sesko. We think Michael Olise is probably going to be heading for Chelsea. Those are the main ones getting mentioned at the moment. I'm sure there's going to be stuff that Liverpool will want to do. All the clubs are going to want to do business. Tottenham are certainly going to spend across this window. So very difficult to put names on things. I think back to last year and I feel like there was a number of transfers caught us off guard. And also because of the Euros, other than those who need to do it for reporting purposes, most of this is probably going to get left till after the tournament, I presume. Excuse me. Birth Media says, "Hi James, talk to me about Maresca Ball. Do you think we can get top four? Can Chelsea finish top four? Yeah, of course, absolutely. It doesn't take much more, right? I mean, if you look back on last season, what did you finish short? It was 5 points or so in the end. I mean, it doesn't take a huge amount more. You'll probably need more points next season. I think it's worth saying. It'll probably go back to needing to be above 70, I think, because Villa and Tottenham both crawled the end of the season with the difficult runs of fixtures they had. So you probably need another sort of 8 points or so. Can Chelsea get an extra 8 points or so next year, considering they drew at home to Burnley, drew at Sheffield United, for example, in a running route, there's 4 points. Yeah, could Chelsea? Yes, absolutely. I feel like it could go either way with Maresca. I think there's been a frustration from Leicester fans of, don't want to say an overcomplication of play, but sometimes you feel like play with a little bit more urgency and tempo because you've got far better players. He certainly always wants to invert one player into midfield. That I'm pretty confident will be a real trait of a Chelsea team. That's not going to, it's come out of Guardiola school. It shouldn't surprise you. So I think you will see stylistic similarities with Chelsea that will become comparable to Manchester City. That said, it's really difficult to gauge one, the profile of player you're now managing is very, very different. That said, it is a young squad, so it should be not too high with too many egos in there. But then you think of how some of those players like to fight over things like penalties. There could be some players in there that might be difficult to control for an inexperienced manager, and he still is that. And obviously, look, winning the championship in his first season is obviously a very good achievement, but it was also an expected achievement. Leicester had clearly the best squad in the championship last year. So, I think it might need a bit of patience, and I think Chelsea fans probably need to realise they're starting again a little bit. I think there will be periods that are erratic, but also I wouldn't be hugely shocked if there's a very favourable starting fixture list. I wouldn't be surprised if Chelsea start really, really well, a little bit like Tottenham did last year, and then there's a acclimatisation from other teams in terms of the process of what's being implemented. But could Chelsea finish top four? Yeah. I mean, I think any of those 8 teams, as I mentioned earlier, the big 6 plus Villa and Newcastle, could all finish top 4 next year. Tom Hyom says, hi mate, what do you make of Gareth taking both Toney and Watkins? Good idea given the different profiles, or a bit of a luxury, and in what situations would you use them in a tournament? I'm very surprised. That was the biggest surprise for me. Probably that Toney was in. I don't have a problem that Toney's in, by the way. Just really surprised that he's gone with 3 forwards. Personally, I would have picked Branthwaite or Grealish over Toney, personally. But I don't feel that strongly about it. It feels like he's done it, I think, in case something happens to Harry. And we had this discussion on Tuesday, and I said to Clates the idea about taking Eze when thinking Grealish would go in, perhaps over Watkins. You think, you can only take 1 forward. And you could imagine a reaction from fans if Southgate didn't take a backup forward and Kane got injured. You can imagine. But I don't see these guys being used. I mean, what circumstance do I see Toney getting on the pitch? The 119th minute, mate, when we're drawing. He's honestly the answer, probably. Because it seems like there's a favouritism to Watkins. So if Kane didn't play, probably going to go Watkins instead. So when Toney gets minutes, I don't know. I mean, Southgate spoke about certain players for certain circumstance, but I still only see that being a thing if Harry Kane got injured. Because not taking Harry Kane off the pitch in important moments. And if you need an additional goal, again, we discussed this as well. If you need a goal and you're trying to create stuff, what are you doing? Are you taking away a midfield player to bring a Toney or Watkins on with Kane and dropping Kane deeper, or you bringing someone like a Palmer or Gordon into the game or something like that? I'm still not even sure that it becomes Toney or Watkins, so I'm really, really surprised actually he's taken both. I don't have a huge problem with it because with a 26-man squad, you've got the luxury. And if something did happen to Kane, then you'd be pleased that he's taken both. But as it stands now, I don't see a huge amount of minutes for either of them. David Fawn says, do you know anything about the 31-year-old manager Brighton are being linked with? Fabian Hurtzler. Looks like he's done a great job at St. Pauli, and he'd be the youngest ever Prem manager. Absolutely nothing. I'm not going to bullshit you, David. Absolutely nothing. I saw the links yesterday, and I'm not surprised. What I mean by not being surprised is that I'm not surprised that Brighton have a plan in place, thinking way beyond what others will be thinking about. Let's be honest. When they appointed De Zerbi, how many of us truly knew anything about him? I'd certainly count myself as one who didn't, right? So, it doesn't surprise me. No, I don't know a lot about him. If he gets appointed, I'd like to think by the time July comes around, I will. Jamie Hayes says, I think he is, to be honest. He's been very good there for Liverpool this season. I've always felt Tripp struggled with people cutting in when he's on the left. So that's obviously referring back to Joe Gomez. No, that's fair enough, mate. FPL Profeta says, hi, compliments from Portugal. Make sure that Sergi will support... Sergi was sporting. Sergi Shah, he means Serge. Serge hasn't decided yet who his Portuguese team is going to be. So I have told him, boss, you do support West Ham, you don't actually have to have one. He's like, no. He keeps coming back in circles to Benfica, and I keep telling him he can't. I said, it's red and white shite. You can't do that. I keep telling him. I've told him you can't go Braga either. They are literally nicknamed the Arsenalis. So I said, you can't be them two, mate. He's like, I don't want to support Porto or Sporting, but everyone else are too shit. And I'm like, we can't win, right? I said the league doesn't even really have a West Ham. Who would be the West Ham of the Portuguese league? Right. Get on Twitter and say, at Sujan Shah, the West Ham of Portugal is, and see if you can convince him maybe. He doesn't want to support one of the top teams, but doesn't want to support anyone's shit. So that's why he's happy with West Ham, isn't it? Jamie says, thank you. I've been trying to get people to understand that bookies' odds are not a direct port from the results they expect. The number of bets expected also affects it a lot. Yeah, of course. However, bookies' odds are very good. So I wouldn't want people to read into that. For example, if you're looking at goal scorer odds for fantasy football purposes, and not use those odds if you're using them, you absolutely should. This is an extreme example where we're talking about weight of money moves the price. For things like, anytime goal scorers at the weekend, it's not going to move it too much because they'll know on a week-to-week basis, okay, well, we can't make Haaland 10-1 to score because we'll get obliterated, right? So you can definitely still use those tools. It comes down to an awareness, which isn't always easy to understand when it's appropriate and when it's not. But I think it is important to state, England are the favourites. England are the favourites with the bookies because they're going to lose a lot of bloody money if England win the tournament because of the volume of bets. And they know that's going to increase massively over the next week or so as well. Particularly, let's say England won 6-0 tonight. England will be a shorter price by the time the tournament starts because the money will move it again. The real favourites in this tournament, without a doubt, are France. Maya AG says, hi James, what's your and general Spurs fans' opinion on players like Carrick and Berbatov, generally liked or loathed? Excuse me. Loved. I think, look, when these players move, originally you're like, But Berbatov particularly was an absolute cult hero for his performances. He had a period running through the end of 2006 from around about 3 months in till when we beat Chelsea in the final, sort of 17-month period. A madness. Absolute madness how good he was. My goodness, if he'd have had pace, he would have been near on the best striker in the world, I think, because there wasn't anything he couldn't do. His first touch was ridiculous. Probably the best first touch I've ever seen from a footballer, actually. Joke player. It was like the higher it went in the air, the better his control was. Carrick only really kind of played for the team for 18 months, and that 05-06 season against under Martin Jol, the Lasagna Gate at the end, I'd say he was Tottenham's player of the year of that season. And there wasn't when Manchester United came calling, there wasn't any reason to really say, oh, you can't go. With Berbatov, he obviously had the kind of mood sulk where he was like, I'm not in the right frame of mind to play. But everyone knew he was going to go and stuff. And also, you couldn't deny it, right? He left. What happened at the end of the year? He was joining the Champions League winners, wasn't he, actually, in that particular summer? So, it was the top team in Europe he was joining, and you couldn't blame him. So Berbatov's been back and played in the Legends game, one of the first games played at the new stadium as well. Really good reception. Time is a nice healer. You might be angry about stuff, but then I think as time goes on, you remember the good bits that people did for you on the pitch. I think if you were as good as those two players were, then largely over time you only get remembered in a fond way, really. There are exceptions, he who shall not be named, etc. Jason McDonald says, hi James, of the promoted teams coming up, who do you think might tear it up, and any players there as fantasy football assets you're already eyeing? I don't think any of them will tear it up. I think all three of them are stronger probably than the three that came up last year, but I don't think any of them will tear it up. Leicester, as I said, are probably looking at a points deduction, and unless I've missed it, I don't know who's managing them at the moment. So that's hard to comment on. Obviously spoke to Paul FPL Tracks a couple of weeks ago about Ipswich, and at the moment the main optimism and the real plus for them is that obviously the managers decide to stay. That's the biggest signing of their summer, which will give them a chance in the way it did with Luton, and I think Rob Edwards really got them in contention to stay up. They need to do business, it's clear. For Southampton, I also think there's business that needs to be done. Having spoke to Matt Samuel, that podcast was released yesterday. They might be, from an experience perspective, though, they might even be the best equipped of the three to stay up, possibly partly because we expect Leicester to get a deduction. Also, 18th might be enough to stay up next year, right? So, but they need to do business as well. Really difficult to say because I think all three clubs will do business. Leicester have got a new manager to come in. Very difficult to say. In terms of fantasy assets, Leif Davis is Ipswich is the one that a lot of you are going to hear a lot about over the next 6 to 8 weeks or so. But it's also a little bit dependent on his price because I think if FPL throw him in at 5 million, then it probably won't be too much of a talking point. Jamie Hayes says, I'm pretty sure I saw the other day that about 45% of bets made in the country have been on England, with France second on about 20%. Yeah, that would probably stand about right. And James Wright says, how much should Palmer be in fantasy football next season? And who is most likely to bounce back to the Prem? Burnley, Sheffield United, Luton. Cheers, Jimbo. I hope you had some good rest. By a distance, Burnley, of the three teams, gone down. Again, needs sort of managerial problem, and hopefully that's done. I'm intending to do a podcast next week with Jack Toner on Burnley and what's happening with Vincent Kompany, whoever comes in. Hopefully it's all done by then. It should be, really. Because I think Burnley started training on roundabouts the 15th of June last summer. So they want to get something sorted very soon. Luton are capable. Sheffield United I'm really concerned about for next year, personally. How much should Palmer be in fantasy football? Excuse me. Okay. Sky, it's going to jump 10.5 or something, probably. FPL, I mean, I think should hit 10, personally. I think beyond that might be a bit too much, but I also think you should hit it. So I'm going to say 10. I think there's a number of players, Palmer, Saka, Watkins, should all get to that number, I think. What we don't want a situation is no one's fault, but I've said this already. Harry Kane left last year and it left 2 premiums in the game. Right. Well, if Mo Salah with 1 year left on his contract did leave Liverpool, you might be left with 1 premium, right? Then if you haven't at least got that real push of those secondary players into that 10 million bracket, then yeah, it's going to get very, very, very template. FPL Berardi looks like he's got the right last one. Says, do you reckon French bookmakers have France as overwhelming favourites? Excuse me. Would be interesting to see some odds, wouldn't it? You're probably better off, and I imagine so, yes, but I don't know what the culture of betting is in France. It might not be big. I have no idea. You're probably better off to get a more neutral perspective. Probably looking at markets like in America and stuff like that, I would have thought. It's kind of well out of it. I'm sure there must be markets available in America, even if it's like via, say, the casinos out there and stuff like that. Maybe that would give you the fairest reflection. I'm not sure. If culturally, it is big in France, then yeah, I'm sure they would be overwhelming favourites, and I'm sure you'll find England as a bigger price. It's certainly right that England are one of the favourites. I don't think that's in question, actually. I think most people can agree with that. And I don't think it's even outlandish if England were to be the second favourites. But for them to be a lower price than France is not right. It's just about money. And FPL Brady adds on, good shout. Cheers, James. Enjoyed the stream. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all of you who contributed in the chat. Very much appreciated. Smash a like. Hit the sub button. If you listen to an audio, 5-star review goes a very long way. We obviously have a full week of content for you next week as well. We'll have an England podcast out for you on Monday. As said, do intend to do a podcast with Jack Toner on Burnley at some point next week. Definitely have a podcast with Gary Mansell on Chelsea next week as well. And we'll have Euro Fantasy content as well. Most likely to be Wednesday and Friday. So we'll have a definitive watch list on Wednesday and we'll go through some final drafts on Friday as well. If you want to support the show for extra content, it's www.patreon.com/planet FPL. Do it because you want to support the show and the free content and keep me in a job, or because you want the additional content, which I can now confirm will include next week from Intermediate Plus tier and above 3 special podcasts looking back on the 3 major tournaments internationally that have happened in Germany historically. A look back at the World Cup in 1974 and the brilliant total football from the Dutch, the invention of the Cruyff turn, etc. Euro 88, Van Basten's volley and England's pathetic laboured 0-pointer, which included defeat to the Republic of Ireland, and also the World Cup in 06. Ronaldo's wink, Rooney's stamp, Del Piero's goal against Germany, and Zinedine Zidane's headbutt will have a feature on all 3 of those tournaments on Patreon next week as well. But just leaves me to say, everyone, have a great weekend, be nice to each other, and cue music please, man child.